And we're
One.
live.
Hey, church, how are you doing? It's good to see you back here. It's been a while since we've been together here around the table with you out there on the live stream, and so we're glad to be back doing this again tonight. Tonight, we have a very special guest with us right here. Lydia Garrison is here tonight. We asked her because some of these conversations that we've been having about women in ministry, the role of women in church, have been happening with Lydia just, over coffee and between services, stuff like that for a while. So it seemed like she was a very good person to include on this discussion tonight. So welcome, Lydia.
Thanks for having me.
She sounds really, authoritative, doesn't she? I'm sure of herself here. There we go. So,
That's okay. I love the spotlight too.
yeah, the two of you.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. On Sunday, I kind of described a little bit about why we are doing this topic. And it's interesting that even as we were describing why we wanted to do the topic, more news and events regarding women in ministry continue to happen. And so, like I said on Sunday, even this weekend on Saturday, Saddleback Church ordained 3 women pastors for the first time in their history. And they are Southern Baptist Church, which is not kosher with the Southern Baptist Convention stuff. And also, the Christian Missionary Alliance denomination is also about to vote to begin to ordain women into ministry as well. And not only that, there's been also some very unseemly events as of late where the church has really diminished women and been wrong with them. And so there's these places where the church really isn't getting it right and isn't being right with women. And we wanted to talk about that because it's just happening, these kind of things are coming up a lot. And so we just thought it was a great topic. It's one that we as a church ought to know what we believe and where we stand as a church. And so that's why we wanted to make it our topic for this evening. All right? So one of the things, in our kind of our little bit of an outline here, one of the things that kind of has made this something of a topic has been a couple of ladies in theology or in the Bible world and all, and how they have made their way and what they've written and what they've said, and then it's how the church has responded to them. So, for instance, what I'm speaking of is Beth Moore, a lady Bible teacher that has done many, many Bible studies that many, many people, many especially women, have participated in and really benefited from. She is a member of a Southern Baptist church, and so she has taken a lot of heat and a lot of abuse from primarily men in the church and primarily Southern Baptist men.
Out in California.
Well, not only there, but also out of wherever Greenville, wherever J.D. Greer pastors from as well and stuff,
Carolina.
South Carolina. And so she's taken a lot of heat for just teaching the Bible and stuff. And then it was about a year and a half ago now at the big church ministry event at Grace Chapel or John MacArthur's church. And every year when they do this event, they take 4 very prominent Bible teachers, they put them on the stage, and they pose topics to them and let each of them speak to it. And they kind of go through a lot of topics all quickly. And that year, the very first thing they did was they said, please answer this question in 2 words, or please address this topic in 2 words.
Which is a horrible way to do Q&A.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And so the moderator just said, all he said was, Beth Moore. And this ripple went through the audience, kind of like of chuckles and ooh and ahs. And then Pastor MacArthur said, go home. And then the audience laughed and chuckled, and these 4 very prominent Bible teachers sat there and let him say it. And then later on, he went on further to say, just because you can sell jewelry does not mean you can sell the Bible, or does not mean you can preach, And very, in my opinion, and in the opinion of many people, very dismissive very rude and very out of line,
Unhelpful.
unhelpful, yeah, in speaking about another woman in the church and all. So, I mean, first of all, so like when you hear that kind of stuff, you know, that and in particular this comment, like, is that the same reaction you guys have for that? Jared, what did you think about? Yeah, you. You're the only person. Yeah, you're the Jared. Uh huh.
In terms of MacArthur's response,
Yeah, I mean, just like, you know, yeah, in general, yeah.
I do not agree with everything that Beth Moore teaches,
Exactly.
but I think his comments, especially in this area, can be unhelpful and uncharitable when dealing with an already incendiary topic, you know. So I think as pastors, when we deal with this topic and others, you know, there are plenty of others out there too, we need to be seasoned with salt in our language and how we deal with people that we disagree with. Because, I mean, I'll be honest, I mean, I probably have the same issues that John MacArthur has with Beth Moore, but I would not say that.
Yeah, yeah. How does that strike you, young lady? You know?
I think, you know, like Jared, I probably have like some similar issues with Beth Moore, especially probably more recently than ever before. I think that his comment, and I think the structure, I think he was kind of
Playing
set up
to it?
to
He was set up a
fail.
little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah, yeah.
To say something dumb. but-
Yeah. I think it's just incredibly dismissive. And I think John MacArthur in particular, like a lot of like a lot of your mainstream pastors, like they see things very black and white that sometimes aren't as black and white and are actually like incredibly nuanced.
Mhm.
So when you say something like that, or you say something, I don't know if Beth Moore actually used to sell jewelry, but I mean,
I'm not sure. I thought maybe she did because of that. I wasn't sure.
yeah, I mean, like if she didn't, I feel like that's incredibly like kind of sexist and dismissive unnecessarily. But there are a lot of women who are trying to do good things for other women in the church. So to say something like that just because Beth Moore, I think, spoke in a pulpit on a Sunday, like one time at that point, it just isn't helpful, even if he's right in some regards, as far as his, like, if his 3-4 paragraph view on Beth Moore is correct, it's not helpful.
Yeah, yeah.
The interesting thing about that interaction was she was asked to speak on that Sunday by her own church leadership. And, you know, and he didn't go after her male church leadership for asking her to speak. He just had the comments about her. And so, you know, that's another layer on an already really messy mess.
Yeah, but and that's the thing always with those kind of situations is there's always more to it than that, you know, and stuff and all. There's another situation I referenced on Sunday also with another woman who is a theologian in her own right and really smart and well written, well articulated. Her name is Amy Bird. She used to be a part of the podcast with Carl Truman and
Mortification and Spin.
Mortification and Spin, right. And she had written a book a few years ago. Steve has it here called No Little Women, right?
It's Lydia's.
Yeah, it's Lydia's
my
book.
copy,
Yeah, that's your
yeah.
copy of it? Okay, yeah. And then she wrote another book more recently in the past about 2 years or so. And it was after writing the second book that a pastor's group within the particular Presbyterian denomination, one of them, I'm not sure which one, called Geneva Commons, began to comment about her and began to really disparage her and to mock her and all kinds of stuff that was just, I mean, I thought it was worse than what was said at the MacArthur thing. And it went unchecked again. And I think that's part of what, I don't think it's surprising that people say dumb things. I'm a champion of that, all right? But I think that but it's surprising to me, though, that when people say dumb things and like other people let them say it and keep repeating it, you know. And so in the Geneva Commons
That was
thing,
in a Facebook group, and
that was in
so
a Facebook group, yeah.
that's like the worst place to have any kind of comments, anyways.
Yeah,
So
yeah. And, you know, and just very few people really kind of spoke out and called him out on it and stuff. And so, so those are some examples, and those are probably two more prominent among many, many, many examples of us not honoring women in our church correctly or honoring women in the church correctly and all. But at the same time, the reason why this is still being talked about is, for instance, on the week before Easter, Shannon Breen, she's the Fox News host, she published a book about the importance of women, and it's about what the women of Bible speak. And it was number 3 on the top 10 list for Amazon bestsellers, and it's still in the top 10 for women's studies. And so, like, there's a lot of people wanting to read about this. As a matter of fact, in the top 10 books on Christian bestsellers, 3 of them deal with women in general, women in the church and their role and stuff like that. And so it's a hot topic and all. And so it's because it is a hot topic, because there have been some examples of the church not doing it well, and because we want to do it well, and we want our people and our church to know where we are, and maybe we'll find ourselves with some places where we need to grow about it. So that's why we're talking about it here tonight. So, I have another reason why we're still talking about this tonight. Okay, and it's because it is really hard to stand against culture. And so culture has a way of seeping in. It's like water. It gets in places you didn't know it could get to. You know what I mean? And so it's leaking at the top of the roof, but you find it down here, you know, in these other parts of the house. And that's what culture looks like in the church. And one of the places where culture is seeping into the house of the church is in regards to its position, its role of women. A pastor just 3 weeks ago, I guess it was, resigned from his position as a pastor. And he gave 15 reasons, and one of them was because the church had not evolved and was properly treating and including women in their ministry. And his position was one of being more like, you know, why aren't they all preachers? Why aren't we doing? And that was a case of where he had allowed culture to seep into his situation and influence what he thought was right and really overtake what was biblical in the matter and all. So that's another reason why we're talking about that today. I think that's all of them. All right. So let's define. There's two standard positions on male and female in the local church. And before we got started, you gave a very, very good example, definition of one of them is egalitarian, right? And would you mind?
Yeah, so egalitarianism is basically a system of defining roles, men and women's roles, that says that men and women are equal, and that their roles in the home and in the church are completely interchangeable.
So then the equal part, is that a problem?
The equal part is true. That's not a problem.
Right, yeah.
Because both of the two positions that we would talk about, the other being complementarianism, both positions will affirm that women and men are equal. But complementarianism says that while men and women are equal, they were created by God with different roles in the family and in the church. And so, but what happens is people who don't agree with that will caricature it and say, well, then that makes women less than men. Right. They would say complementarianism then means that women are inferior to men because they were not created for leadership and different things like that. So, and again, that's a caricature or a misrepresentation of it. That's not what the system really believes or teaches, that men and women are equal but created with different roles. And so so egalitarianism is more like the roles are interchangeable, and roles are really defined more by like what you're passionate about and what you're good at. Doesn't matter what your gender is. So
Well, and in that and in that thing of being equal, and that they can do anything and all, is it not enough that they're equal? You know, is it that for a woman to be really equal, she needs to be able to do everything a man can do? That's what the definition is saying, in a sense, right? Of being egalitarian. For her to be equal, she has to be able to do everything a man can do. Would that be correct, or is that overstating it?
I'm
that
not
I've
sure.
ever
I
been
don't.
accused of that.
I don't know. I don't know. I'm
What
not
would
really
you
sure.
say? What would you say about that? That if that that in an egalitarian definition, that it's not enough for a woman to be equal. She needs to be able to do everything a man can do, and that is the definition of equal. Is that accurate stating, or is that more nuanced than that?
I think I think so. I mean, understanding that both like complementarianism and egalitarianism can look completely different depending on like who you ask, because
Really
it's such
true.
a broad spectrum as
Right,
far
there's
as like
a-
what it looks like. Because I mean, there are complementarians like John Piper, very big complementarianism. I also am complementarian, but John Piper and I would definitely disagree about a couple things. So they're all like a big spectrum, but I think that egalitarianism generally there's no biblical reason why a woman shouldn't be able to hold the title of pastor or teacher. There's no reason why women shouldn't teach men, and they have to, do a lot of, in my opinion, like gymnastics when it comes to getting around some of the verses. But
That's what I wanted to ask next. Then, so in that case, because in a moment we'll get to the biblical definitions for complementarianism, but in egalitarian, how do they handle the passages such as in Timothy and so many others that do define the positions in the church as being gender based? Can anyone answer that? Can you address that?
I think, and this is a little bit of a guess, I think they would say that those are cultural mandates that would not apply to our culture today. That was for 2,000 years ago, which is obviously a very different culture than we live in today. And so that was a cultural mandate that we are not still today bound by,
Yeah, yeah,
is the way that I understand it.
yeah.
yeah, a lot of times they like base it in, women at that time, didn't know how to read, they weren't educated. So Paul's saying that women who are typically uneducated shouldn't be the ones educating men who were more educated. Or so it ranges from that, which sounds potentially pretty rational, all the way to like, Paul was a misogynist and he let his own bias into the Bible, which I think we can say pretty outright if we believe in any sort of authority of scripture that doesn't make sense.
Or the power of the Holy Spirit, and everything like that, right?
And they'll also point to, and I mean, I think it happens on both sides. You point to the verses that are the strongest for your case. So
Yeah.
they're going to point to things like all of the women that are mentioned in the New Testament. They're going to point to people like Deborah. They're going to, and in that potentially overemphasize some of the roles and responsibilities the women had, and kind of gloss over the things that are problems.
Or misapply other scriptures that maybe you might think would sound that way. Like, so to take a verse that says there's neither Greek nor Jew, nor, barbarian or Scythian or whatever, and say, look, there's no difference. There's no difference in people. So there's no reason why a woman can't be a pastor. There's no difference, when really that is more talking about who can be a recipient of grace. I mean, who
Right.
can be saved? There's no, you can't exclude people from the assembly because they're a Gentile
Right.
anymore. And so that verse is not about who can be a pastor or role responsibilities and the created order and that kind of thing. So,
And yet, Paul says that a pastor should be a husband of one wife. And so there's a very clear kind of delineation, I would think.
yes, there is. I mean, I think that you can make the case for male elders from other verses. I wouldn't go there, but I think that,
Yeah.
Paul does say, he does say that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's
Husband of one
also
wife.
like they would point to the context and culture of the day too.
Oh yeah.
So when you're talking about First Timothy 2, I've heard a ton, including like the cult of Artemis influencing women of the time. Not the Greek Artemis, the Ephesian Artemis, and she denoted power and everything, and so that the cult was influencing the church and their beliefs about the roles of men and women, which is what Paul is actually talking about in First Timothy 2. And they would say, well, you know, he was just talking about the cult-like behavior. You know, he's not actually talking about, anything else but telling those people who were using excessive power to dominate men in the local church. And I'm like, I don't know that I buy that. But I mean, you can believe that, but I don't know that I buy that.
Yeah. So egalitarian just says that men and women are created equal, and that anything a man can do in the church, a woman can do in the church.
She wouldn't be excluded from anything based on her gender.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And then, meanwhile, the flip side of that, the complementarian position, is one that says that both are created equal, both have equal value.
Equal value
but
and
they-
worth and
and
dignity.
worth. Yeah.
So when we talk
Both
about
are
being
equal
created,
image bearers of God.
right? So that's where I think that the talking about men and women being equal, we're referring to their worth and their value and their dignity. They're equal as image bearers, but then they're complementary, so they are created with different complementing roles that work together. So men were created to do a certain type of thing, and women are created kind of to do a certain type of thing in the church and in the home. And there's a little bit of wiggle room, I think, there too, like in places where you're not defying scriptural commands. So like I think that we do have it on good scriptural authority that women are not supposed to be pastors and elders, but like there's nothing that says a woman can't work outside the home. So just to affirm that women are created with a different role in the home typically than men occupy, that doesn't mean that women have to be barefoot in the kitchen making sandwiches all day.
Yeah, there's
which is kind of that's what happens. You get these like straw man caricatures, these straw man arguments that kind of like come to define a certain viewpoint, and that's what everyone attacks. You'd say, well, people would say, well, complementarianism is too traditional, or it's misogynistic, or it's patriarchal, or whatever. And so there's just a lot of like lack of critical thinking and a lot of lack of defining terms and understanding what these words really mean before we throw them around, because patriarchal and misogynistic get used like synonyms today, and they're not at all. But somehow like patriarchal has become like a bad thing when it's not bad at all. It doesn't really, it's kind of a morally neutral thing. It just means that the family or whatever is kind of governed by a male, and that's not bad.
You're a guy, though.
You're part of the
Yeah, that's true.
You're part
I
of
know.
the problem.
I know.
So
Patriarchy.
I can't say that.
patriarchy, yeah. So then, but the thing about you came right up to the point of this. I thought you were going to go there, and I want to make sure we say this. And that's the thing about being complementarian, is that, and you were saying like made equal with different roles, and it's when both of those roles are fulfilled that you're complementing and you're working well together.
Yeah.
It's that the church's fullest expression of Christ and God's character is when men and women who are created equal and who are equal image bearers and who are made with different roles, when those roles fit together in the local church and the full expression of those roles, that is when God is most fully, you see it.
Absolutely.
It works, the same thing is true in the home and, in those expressions like that.
Yep.
So complementary means that they complement one another and they are completing. Would that be okay to say?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, then if someone disagrees, I can talk to you. All right. You know what? I came across this one German phrase, and I won't say this correct, I don't think, but if you're out there and you can say this correctly, you can say it to yourself at home. Kinder, Kuch, and Kirch. It's a German phrase, which is a German slogan, and it's kind of, derogatory, and it meant children, church, and kitchen, or children, kitchen, and church. In other words, that's where women belong. And in that culture, that's one of the things they thought. And it's kind of the same thing as barefoot in the kitchen here, in the States kind of be. And those kind of things exist in every culture, it seems like, where there is a literal and a very obvious diminishing of women and their role in the home or in the church or in culture in general. And so it is important that's why it's important, I think, for when it's appropriate and right, for us to stand up to church leaders who do the things they did, whether it's about Amy Bird or whether it's about Beth Moore or whether it's about any other woman, that we stand up to times when women's value is diminished as an image bearer, like that and all.
Mm-hmm.
Because, culture does that. We see it here, and you see it in so many of our movies and everything like that. And so for the church to be on the right side of that, we have to stand up for when women are disregarded and diminished and all like that. So anyway.
Melissa has a question for you.
Who it is?
Melissa.
Oh, man. Melissa asks hard questions.
That's why it's a question for you.
Oh, is it really? What do you think about the fact that the church, which is growing quickly in Iran, is led? Oh, yeah. I should have known a missions person would ask that because it's true. There have been so many great missionary movements in the world, whether it's Annie Soper in Peru or whether it's in India or in so many other places where women have stepped in and done great work. So, okay, this is what I think about that. All right, this is what I think about that. It's that God's truth is still God's truth. And by that I mean that whether it is when another famous Christian wrote an outstanding book on the church and its function and its manifestation in the local community while he was having a wrongful relationship with the person that was editing the book with him. And yet his book has been used by thousands around the world because it was truth. Even though, so truth is truth. Even if sometimes the thing dispensing the truth is not always ideal. So, and this, probably a lot of people won't agree with me on this, but like Ravi Zacharias taught a lot of stuff that is really honest and true and good. He did.
I'm not laughing about Ravi. I'm laughing at Grace.
I don't want to know. I don't want to know. And so Ravi taught a lot of stuff. He was in sin, apparently, a lot of times that he taught it, but his truth was still the truth. And so, I venture to say, I can't say with absolute authority, but what I would think is that where no man stood in and took the lead, a woman did. And God still honored the dispensing of the truth, the preaching of the truth, the preaching of the gospel, that other people came to know Christ.
Right. Yeah, and I think that just because that's the way
Am I
that
gonna
it's
get kicked out of the church now?
I don't think so.
Okay.
no,
That's what Paul
I think that
says.
yeah,
Oh,
I
good.
think that just
He
because
said that?
Yeah.
What did he say?
Well, in Philippians 1 says, some indeed preach Christ from envy and rivalry, but others do
Okay.
so from goodwill.
Thank you very much.
And then it says, what then? Only that in every way, whether in pretense or in truth, Christ is proclaimed, and in that I rejoice.
Yeah. All right. Very good. That's great.
Also, women know a lot of stuff.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it.
Just because that's not the way that it's designed and that's not the way that it works ideally doesn't mean that it can't work at all. Doesn't mean that God won't use women when they step into that gap, but what that means is that there's a gap.
Right.
It means that you have men in Iran who are not stepping in to that role, and they're not.
It goes to her quote before we got started here.
Yeah.
What was that thing you said?
Oh, so Albert Mohler, who's the president of the Southern Baptist.
He's the
Sorry.
president of Southern
Yes.
Baptist Seminary.
Yeah.
Yes. So he said in talking about like women in the church, just because, and he kind of roots this in the whole nature of like how men and women were designed by God and also their curses that come after the fall. But he said that if women can do something, they will, and if women do something, that men won't. Which is basically just tied into like men, like women, because in Genesis 3,
Yeah, I was gonna
the
say, where do those
yeah,
ideas come
you
from?
know, in Genesis
Yeah.
3, like the curse that's given to the woman is your desire will be for your husband, he will rule over you. And that desire is not like, oh, I just love him so much. It's no, I want your spot. I want to take the driver's seat. And God is specifically saying that that's not for women to have. So women, we know a lot of stuff, and we are supposed to be active members in furthering the gospel and being part of the church. But you know, there is something like, you know, we're not supposed, we can be great passengers, but that driver's seat role is for, you know, like your husband in the home or for the male pastors in the church.
Well,
Are we just going to talk about 1 Timothy 2 yet?
Let's talk about Grace being spicy tonight.
I agree.
She's like super spicy tonight.
She's going to get me fired.
Ellen's trying to be spicy too. No, it's not your fault, Ellen, that you're smarter. It's not your fault. You just can't help it. It's the way God, it's the way God
I
made
think
you.
so much of, there's something I kind of wanted to, not to backtrack a little bit, but when talking about complementarianism, we're talking about how, a lot of times complementarianism gets this straw man argument or this caricature. But I think the problem is that a lot of times that's what complementarian looks like. That is the complementarianism that a lot of people have grown up with and are frustrated by.
So define that a little bit.
But it's
then.
not. Well, yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so I guess I'm saying that in some points people take, you know, okay, John Piper, for instance. John Piper is a complementarian, and he would say that women shouldn't be police officers, that women shouldn't be CEOs, that, you know, all of these different things, that all women are supposed to be submissive to all men. It's those kinds of problems that people deal with, but the fact is that, you know, we weren't created to be like, you know, the sandwich makers of the kingdom. Like, we have real, like, active roles. And, you know, sometimes that is making sandwiches because we're great at cooking. But I think that
I can vouch for Lydia's cooking. That's pretty good.
there's so much that we're able to do, even in roles that aren't, you know, pastor or elder. Like, there are so many people. Women are half the church. If half the church doesn't do anything,
Unfortunately, probably more than half.
yeah, probably more than half.
And that's part of the.
Yeah,
That's another problem for another
like
day.
there's so many active things that women can do. So the smart women, you know, like Ellen and all of the other lovely ladies out there, like, we have real things that we can do, and that's part of that's the whole messy discussion of what that actually looks like. So if women can't, you know, if we can, you know, at least like within the context of our own church, with the statement of belief that we have, and, you know, what the beliefs are around this table, we can say women shouldn't be pastors, but it's okay, now what's the rest of it? What does the rest of that look like?
Yeah.
So, but
Yeah.
I think it's encouraging when you actually think about it, because there is a lot of stuff that women can do.
Absolutely. Yeah. So let's talk then about our position at Crossing, and talk about how we have perhaps fulfilled that at different times, and ways we've fulfilled that at different times. And I wish that we had thought to put a link to this in the comments tonight, but we didn't think about that.
I don't think there's any way I can do it from right here.
Okay, very good. So, why don't
No, I
you
can't.
talk about that, because I think I can. Why don't you start us on that?
Start us on this.
Yeah.
What do you want me to talk about?
Begin to define our role on women in our Crossing's position on women in the ministry, and
Okay.
women in church.
All right. So we actually took up this discussion When did we do this? It was like
Well,
maybe almost a year ago.
we published it in
Sometime
August
last year.
2020.
Okay, so probably like last summer sometime we started to talk, just the elders, we started to talk about like um, what does it mean to affirm women in the church and that kind of thing. And so we didn't I don't think we ever really I don't think we ever planned on making a big deal out of this. We wanted to put together a couple of position papers to state our position, just in case we ever needed to, if anyone ever asked or was curious about it. So we talked about it some, and we did some reading and research, and we spent a little bit of time thinking and praying about this. And basically, we put on paper this belief that we would affirm that men and women are created equal, with equal value and dignity and worth, and we are equal image bearers of God, but that we're different. We have different, created with different roles, and so that's not a bad thing. That's just the way that we're designed, and we have scriptural support for that. What we do at Crossing then with that information is say, basically, we believe that women can do anything in the church except be a pastor or an elder. We just a few years ago changed our stance, I guess, on deacons, and even said that women can serve as deacons, because I think that we find some evidence in the Bible that Phoebe be an example, and then there's questions around the interpretation in 1 Timothy 3, some of the language there that might lead us to believe that women could be deacons. And so we, since that's not an authoritative role like elder, where you're in a role of authority, then we said we believe that women can be deacons. And so deacons, ministry leaders, almost anything, really. And then even, this was something that we talked about last summer when we were doing this. We even talked about women teaching on Sunday mornings, because, some churches would take a really hard stance and say that women, like I'm thinking of like the Beth Moore thing. I don't know the details around
Right.
why she was asked to speak that Sunday, or what she was asked to speak about. I don't know those details enough to say whether that's a situation that I would have been okay with or not. But some churches will just take a really hard line with, like, a woman could never speak from the stage or from the pulpit or whatever. And then obviously the opposite side of that is women can be a pastor and preach and do everything, with no limitations. And so we basically said we would look at a woman like in a speaking opportunity on a case-by-case basis. Basically, we found a series of spectrums that cover different things, such as I'm looking to see if any of them are in here. I should have pulled it up to have it, accessible right here. But it's basically, you have it right here. Great.
Isn't that it?
That's nice. Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
So there's a series of spectrums, or a series of questions that we would
It's
ask.
referenced at the bottom of our document,
Yep.
our position paper.
Yeah. So if we ever had a question about a woman, who's going to speak on a Sunday morning to the entire congregation, like that's one of the questions is like, what's the context? Or is she speaking to the whole church, or is it not congregational? Is it like at a training event, or a conference or something like that? What's the nature of the topic? Is it exegetical, so is she like teaching scripture, or is it more testimonial or inspirational or topical or something like that? What level of authority is being conveyed in the speaking? Is it directive, so is it like governmental, or is it non-directive? Is it personal, relational, or impersonal, non-relational, formal, informal? Is this an ongoing thing, or is this kind of like just a one-time thing? So there's There's a series
So
of
it's
different
very
things that we would.
nuanced.
It is, and but what that allows us to do is it allows us to take every situation on a case by case basis and not have to lock ourselves into a position where we say no, never, or yes, always. And so I think that that's a good place for us to be. I'm pretty comfortable with that. I like it. So so that's kind of where we are, what we believe as a church. And then we have this document, which I don't know who wrote. I do know who wrote this. It's very well written, by the way.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Yeah, thank you. So then, in the context of our statement, then, are we saying that women can never teach
No.
in the pulpit, rather? In the pulpit, it's not down there, but you know.
No.
So then,
It would depend on the situation. It would depend on the topic. It would depend on the audience. It would depend on, several different factors.
right? Okay.
I still think we need to go to 1 Timothy 2. I think we should unpack it.
We'll go for it.
So what?
No, that ain't me. That ain't me.
So do you want to? I mean, if you want to talk, I have some. Go ahead. If you want to talk about that, pull it up and talk about it.
1 Timothy 2?
Yeah.
Okay. You want me to read it?
Yeah.
Okay. 1 Timothy 2,
Tell them what you're reading from, so they can check.
11 to 14, right? Let a woman learn quietly with all submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over man. Rather, she is to remain quiet. For Adam was formed first, then Eve, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman was deceived and became a transgressor.
Are you answering, Colin?
Yeah, I just said it's not, but we can get it to them.
Yeah, we will.
It's available, and these things they're available, for anybody that wants to see them.
So go ahead. Go where you lead where you're going here on that passage.
All right, I'll be fast because we have a little bit of time. But Paul is directly talking about Genesis 1 to 3, right? He's talking about the created order of things, Adam and Eve, and Adam being formed first, which is what we all affirmed already, that men are created for this specific role when we're talking, because this is what it really boils down to. This is like the whole crux. Everybody gets their pants in a bunch because can women preach on a Sunday? And that's usually where this conversation really ends up. And he says, no, like that's Paul. That's not me. That's Paul saying that. And he gives some specific guidelines. He says, first off is what all four of us have already said, that God has given that specific role and that sole responsibility to men. And then he talks about the created order of things. He talks about the order, and usually what people read this, they usually read that women are incapable of preaching. That's not what Paul's even remotely talking about. Like, he does not say those words. I think we do this verse a disservice when we say that, because he's talking about the order of who was created, and then he talks about Adam and Eve being deceived. And we also usually think, well, some people take it to the extra step. Well, you're saying women are more gullible than men? Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, if we're going into studies, like men are more gullible in some areas and women are more gullible in other areas, like that's also not what Paul's talking about here. It's as if the idea of the order was specifically not engaged by Satan. So what I mean is that Satan knew that Adam was in charge. And he knew that if he went to Adam, he would not win. So he subverts Adam and goes to Eve. And he does that because he knows that this is already an attack on the created order of things that God has put in place. That's what Satan does. And so he goes to Eve and then deceives her. And then he knew that Adam would also engage in the sin if he deceived Eve. And so I would like to also point to everybody who may have an issue with this verse. God's not angry with Eve. I mean, there's a sense that he is, but he's angry with Adam. You had a job. You had the responsibility of leading your wife, and you failed. And you know what has a curse to that? Sin has come into the world, and you will struggle with this leadership. And your wife will always want to be in charge of you. This is exactly like the curse that he lays out is exactly what happened at the garden. And so that's exactly what Paul's talking about. And so it's not an issue of competency. It's an issue of God's natural created order. Mm-hmm. And that is what's being displayed when we talk about this area, when we're talking about preaching and teaching on a Sunday. That's kind of nuance I would go. I agree with Lydia. I think John Piper goes a little far with they can't be all police officers. He would even go as far as to say, they can't even teach small groups to where men are in the small groups. I don't know where I stand with that, honestly. Right now, I'd probably say that's a little far for me, but I don't know, because I've had women teach at youth group. So, but that is what's being talked about. It's not competency. It's a protection of God's created order, and that it ultimately lands on the responsibility of who God has created men to be and who God has created women to be. So that's my quick thoughts on that.
Good explanation of it. Appreciate it. Yeah. So then in the context of we got enough time to do this. So then the context of like what our church says we believe, that there is a wide range of opportunities for women to lead in our church, and on the history of our church, we have, at least especially in my tenure as a pastor, that in the past 16 years, we've had, Debbie Swigert led our worship ministry for many, many years. And
some churches would take a huge issue with that.
I know. Yeah. And so, but, her leadership was, the fact that she was a woman leading was never an issue, and then not only that, but then we, like you said, a few years ago, we did recognize, the nature of being a deacon is not a gender related, but a function, which meant that anyone, a male, female, either one could participate. And so in that time, Chris Gregory has been leading that team as a woman, leading the team there, leading a deacon. And then in addition to that, Lori Walsh has been on that team, and Carolyn Christick has been on that team, as well, serving that capacity. And then also Cindy Newman leading, for many years, she led the Global Outreach Team. The Global Outreach Team, outside of personnel, was the largest chunk. It was the largest ministry in our church, financially speaking, and she oversaw that, and so that's, you're given a lot of leadership and a lot of authority and responsibility, and that, as well as just shepherding and caring for and guiding our church in that particular ministry. And now she is also leading in the capacity in our business administration and that aspect of our church as well. And so we have allowed women to step into leadership roles in many, many different areas as a church and all. And so, and we would love to get to grow in that more. Mm-hmm. And not only that, but when we have always held we've always believed that whenever we're talking to our church as a whole for direction and for opinion, just for guidance, women have always been a part of that. And so, like, when your hiring team, when the people who interviewed you, there was a mixture of men and women, and none of those women had lesser authority or input than any of the guys on that hiring team. Mm-hmm. They had equal opinion and say in that process. you know. And we've done that across the board, whether it's been all kinds of assessment processes we've been through and hiring teams we've been through and all kinds of things like that. We've always wanted to make sure that women had a voice in that and were participating in that in any way possible.
And that kind of goes back to something that you said a while ago about, I forget exactly how you said it, but it made me think it's not the, something about how, you know, the system's complementarianism, you know, how it's applied. And it's not that, oh, I remember you said that people caricature it because that's the way that they've seen it played out. And in a lot of cases, that's the way that it does play out. But that's not what it made me think was that's not a problem with the system, though. That's a problem with the people applying it.
Right.
That is because a system that we may find biblically supported is being applied by sinful people, and they're abusing it, and that arises from our sin nature. That doesn't arise from a flaw in the system. It doesn't mean that just because it's been wrongly applied that we go back and we change, you know, or we reinterpret what we see in the Word. It just means that we have sin issues that we have to figure out how to fix. So I think that, you know, to what you're saying now, I think that's great. I mean, I think that that's something that we should be, in a healthy way, proud of, that we have so far been able to apply a view that says men and women are created equally. They have different roles, but wherever we can include both men and women, we'll do that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I have to share your story though, because it hadn't always been that way. Years and years ago, when I was first pastoring here, we had a very, very dear brother that I love very much, but he comes from a very different perspective on this topic. And we had, and the ushers were, and that's back when we used to hand out the communion elements. And I just instituted including women as ushers. And so this brother walks up to me on the Sunday morning when he's leading the ushers, and he's supposed to be handing out communion. And he walks up to me and goes, "We have a problem. We don't have enough ushers." And I looked around the room, and I'm like going, and I'm counting, going, "Yeah, we do." And he goes, "No, we don't." And then I'm realizing he's like going, "Those women ain't ushers."
he's counting them in.
He's like going, "Those women aren't qualified to hand out communion. That's just wrong." And I'm like, that's a really awkward place to be in the middle of a service.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? But I says, "No, we got plenty. Y'all need to go to work out there." You know. But he had a very strong opinion that they were not ushers, and it was not right for those women to hand out communion.
And that's one of those weird places that I'm sorry, but I think it's weird the way that this gets applied in some situations. You know, it's like, who would ever think that would be? I guess just because it's a formal function,
But
in
it was
the
an
church.
old. It was very. It was.
Yeah,
a,
no,
It was
I-
a, I
yeah.
mean, I mean.
I get it. That it comes from like old traditional,
right. Exactly. That's the word I
very.
was- yeah.
I mean, just very traditional, you know, gender roles, maybe, or values. But I don't know. I guess today I sort of chuckle at that, like thinking, who thinks that a woman can't, you know, pass out communion cups or something?
Well, in that worldview, they could prepare communion, but they're not allowed to pass it out.
because
you
you
know what I
prepare it in the kitchen.
I don't know.
So
Who knows?
you-
Who knows? I'm not sure about that. But you know, but he taught me a lot of stuff. I really respect him. But that was just this place where he did have a much more traditional conservative opinion on it and everything. You know, having said all that, you know, I think that there's still a lot of room for us to grow. And I'm
Mhm.
curious about if anyone who's listening tonight, or if anyone around this table, sees opportunities for us to grow. You know, or sees a place where maybe maybe we need to reconsider what we're doing, that it's wrong, perhaps, you know, or we're just being short-sighted. So I'm interested in opening us up to that kind of input, you know. So,
Mhm.
and so that goes for anyone who's listening in tonight as well. So if you have any comments, put that in there. I'd love to hear from you. So anyone, want to say something that I think we ought to make sure we pay attention to for us being able to value and include women in our ministry and all? I'm getting
Why
to
are
you.
you pointing to me?
I'm getting to you in a minute because I already know something I want you to say.
Oh, no.
Okay. I asked this question with you in mind, probably. So, anyone? No,
Ask it.
no,
Ask it.
no. I think that a question I want to ask is it okay for why aren't we having a woman lead us in communion?
Because
You don't
that
have-
is a teach. Oh, I'm
I
not.
mean, yeah, it doesn't matter. You don't have to. I mean, I'm just putting that question out there. That's a question I have for us as a church. You know.
Well, when we've discussed it in the past, because that is a teaching. Typically, that's a teaching role, where we're asking someone to teach the Bible to a mixed audience, and so based on Paul's instructions, we think that's one area that would be excluded.
Good. All right. Great. So then, what about what other opportunities would a woman have to be in our pulpit as a church?
Most others, I think, or
I just looking to see what she would say. She was if she was smiling or anything. She had a thought in her
most
mind. but
others.
yeah.
I mean, praying.
Yeah.
I think praying. So leading us in family prayer is one where I don't see any reason why a woman couldn't pray in a mixed group like that.
Yeah.
And kind of going back to our situational matrix of trying to figure out if that would be an okay thing. There's probably lots of reasons where we would have a woman.
I mean, there's plenty there. I mean, I can think of not actually 100, but 100, different areas.
The missionary speaking.
I mean, yeah, like there are
this
things,
is-
and why, I guess my question is, why does it need to be the pulpit?
Oh, that's where we speak from on Sundays, kind of.
Well, there's different,
you can put up
like-
that really helped the
I
matters.
mean,
Let's make a woman's pulpit over there.
No,
so
to
she's
your
not,
to your point is I lead from not the pulpit. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
there are lots of areas. Maybe there are women musicians out there that I don't know about that you are leading your church in music. I have plenty of female musicians. I
see your point now.
I
I see your point now.
Yeah,
Okay,
like
yes,
I
yes,
have
yes, yes.
there are needs that I need for our sound tech and live stream. I mean, Marla's always looking. Are you looking to teach? There are a bunch of kids on a Sunday that need a faithful, godly teacher to share the truth with them
Yeah.
about who God is. Ellen has plenty of things where hospitality and greeting is a real need and an issue. Like, the preaching of the word is important, and I would say it's probably the most important thing on the Sunday. But there are other very
But
important.
all the other parts are important, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are a lot of other areas that are also important.
Yeah.
And not just on Sundays. There's
Yeah.
lots of areas where men and women can fill those roles, and women are needed to fill those roles. I mean,
Right.
because that's Paul's instructions too. Is older women teach the younger women. That's a biblical
Yeah.
instruction that we have.
Right.
So
And you just mentioned Ellen as being a leader. She's a leader in our church,
Yeah.
and leads the hospitality.
I was just going to say, I think sometimes women, and I think, in Amy Bird's most recent book, we get so caught up in, instead of questioning what has God called us all to do, it's what can't women do? Where's the line? How close
Can we get to
can
that?
I
How
get
far
to
is
the
too far?
line? Which I think is just a very natural,
is,
sin
yeah.
nature type of thing to do, where you
Yeah.
tell, as a kid, I wasn't allowed to play in the front yard. So naturally I wanted to play in the front yard, even though all my toys and the play set was in the backyard, just because it's the thing I couldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
I think that our churches would be so much healthier and so much more vibrant if women didn't if we didn't focus on what exactly can a woman do in the pulpit, when it's there are so many other things that women can do than that men can do and that men aren't doing. Like, like there's so much stuff. I was listening to like a talk on just complementarianism that included Jen Welkin, I think with like the Village Church, and I adore that woman.
She's
Whole
good.
different conversation, but she had said like, what a shame it would be if little girls growing up in church, the only women that they really have to look up to is like their Sunday school teacher in like the 5th grade. Like that's as far as it goes, because like women are the best. We have men and women downstairs. Women are the best volunteers downstairs, but there should be women that are in positions where, girls can look up and admire them and see their maturity everywhere in the church. It's not just the nursery,
well
as
said.
important as that is, but it's everywhere. And it might not be in the pulpit preaching, and that's okay.
Right.
I think that we just have to look at, that's the God's created order, and if you have a problem, you can take it up with him.
Yeah. Well, and there's like
She
3.
said it.
Yeah, I think there's like 3 people. Like I have Lydia on my staff, and this is like a very small thing, and I know we're already there, but like one thing that Lydia did when she first came on staff, she started the girls' Bible study group, and there was one student in particular that wasn't coming out on Fridays at all. I'd been reaching out to this family. She came to the Bible study though. And after like so much time, she started coming out to youth group. Like you're like, well, why did I bring that up? Because that's an area that women are even commanded to be in. And now, I mean, she comes out on a Friday and she brings friends, and the reality of what Lydia did in her life will forever change her, And like, I know this is similar vein, but different topic, is like Lydia and I have talked about too, like the need for deep theology and Bible study for women.
That's what I wanted to close with, yeah.
And maybe it's good that I'm closing there.
That's
Yeah.
a whole,
Yeah.
that's a whole other episode.
I think the
Much to
church
say
does
there.
a huge disservice
Next month.
Yeah.
in what that looks like. But I'm grateful for people like Lydia, grateful for people like Cindy Newman, grateful for people
Charlene
like
Earl.
Charlene Earl.
She's going to start hers right now.
Right.
7:01.
and people who have that sense of the desire to share deep theology
And transformative truth.
and transformative truth
Yeah.
that I think lacks. I'll just say in other studies. I'm
Yeah.
not going to point out other studies. In other studies where it's like, kind of like let's color, or let's kind of like
No, well, this
small
is what it
things.
is. And if you go ahead, you need to speak about this,
I was just going to say, I think most,
because I love just let her just turn her.
so many women's, Bible studies, if you can even call them that, are, a lot of them are books. They're not really focused on the Bible. They're talking about, God thinks you're pretty, or, Jesus can be your friend since you don't have any right now. Like so many, like that's all it is. It's all this like fluffy cotton candy. Like here's a verse kind of taken out of context that'll hopefully make you feel good. And, to like quote Jen Welkin again, she's like, Psalm 139 is like this verse that we use for women, like, this passage used for women all the time. Like, I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. And that's true. But we keep giving women this verse, and it's not working, because there's still 10 new Bible studies every year, devotional books that are telling women that they're made in the image of God. Like, if it worked, it would have happened by now. But women don't need to focus on I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, but that I have a maker who's fearful and wonderful. It's this emphasis on Christ, and if you know God, if you know Scripture, then that's going to affect how you live your life. It's not just these Band-Aid patch fixes. Women need to know their Bibles, and they need to be told
Theology.
and they need to be told by their pastors that that's something that they can do. I was so privileged, because I had a youth leader in the 8th grade who walked us through the entire book of Romans from her college notes from Karen. And starting there, it's I can't go, it's we can know, you can know the Scripture. The Bible is not too hard for you. You don't just need to know how to be a Ruth or an Esther or a Mary. Like, you're supposed to
Proverbs
be like
31.
Christ, just like everybody, like just like men. So
Mm.
there's there's so much, so much good stuff. And I don't know, I'm way too passionate about like women, like teaching the Bible to women, that I don't really care about the men. You guys got to deal with it yourselves. But
That's true. I think that's specifically an area, like an important area that is lacking in the local church.
and that's specific. Like Paul says that specifically. He tells older women to teach younger women. Like, that is a specific command. So like trying to split hairs about when a woman can teach a man
it points
something
back to
or-
the curse, doesn't it? It points
Yeah.
back to 1 Timothy 2, where we just talked about it. Just like you have this thing that is like obviously lacking. Like and wolves in sheep's clothing are like willingly are leading lamb to slaughter. But our concern is a woman being in the pulpit and her being just as good as a man. Like, people are dying and need Christ, and we're so focused on this that we're missing such a wonderful harvest that's ready.
Yeah. Well, I wanted her to get to say that, what she just said, because it is true. Is that most women's studies are not, I don't know how to say it,
Robust. Theologically robust.
Very logical. Thank you very much. That's very well done.
Yeah,
Mm.
thanks.
That's a lot nicer than what I was thinking, probably.
Saving
So-
you from an overstatement
Yeah,
right
saving
here.
me from an
Or-
overstatement. And it's just like, but you said something beforehand too. You said that how does bad theology get in the church?
Oh.
Say that. Repeat that again.
Okay. So Amy Bird talks about it in this book, No Little Women, and I forget the passage that it's based off of, but essentially, if we take complementarianism too far and we say, well, women can't be pastors, I think a lot of times, a lot of churches, they say, well, women aren't going to be pastors, women aren't going to teach. So, like, who cares what they do?
Kind of an
Like,
afterthought.
just let the women have their little Bible study with their little, like, fruit salads and coloring books. or
Cucumber
something.
sandwiches.
Exactly.
Yuck.
And then they're reading, like, on, sometimes some really trashy theology.
Yeah.
Like, it is, like, not only is it just shallow, but it's straight up unbiblical.
Jesus
And
calling.
then you have half your church or better reading
Jesus calling.
bad books that aren't helpful, and they are the ones, usually spending a lot more time with their kids at home. They're raising their children with bad theology, influencing their husbands with bad theology. Like, women are so crucial to, like, the spiritual health of the church. So if they're neglected, and like we said, it's not because they're gullible. It's because we're extremely persuasive and smart. It's the opposite problem.
Amen.
Amen. That's
Yep.
right.
Yep.
Well, I think I loved what you're saying right there, that if we do not take them seriously enough and we don't consider them as equal partners in theology, equal partners in our teaching, that we really are leaving an open door to bad theology and a weakness in our churches.
Yes.
And I just think that you just can't, I wanted you to get to say that, because when you said that to me other times, I thought, that's so good. It's so right. It's so true.
Yeah.
So anyway.
Yeah.
All right, we need to wrap up, guys. Thank you guys for being here. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank
You were
you.
great, and thank you guys for it, and thank you guys for being with us tonight. We appreciate you very much, and we'll be back next month. We don't know what we're talking about yet. If it's her agenda, we'll be talking about women, theology for women,
And maybe
or
she'll
something
be
like
back
that,
if we do
Yeah.
that.
So thanks for being here tonight. Thanks everyone.
ask her to
Have a
teach.
great night. Don't forget. This Sunday, we have our testimony. Nancy Smoyer's doing her testimony. I'm going to be out of town, and so Jared's going to be preaching. The week after that's the missions conference. Please register for that. Get on board with that. We have some stuff we're really excited to get to tell you about. We have the one meal event coming up very soon, and the men's breakfast is coming up at the end of the month. So register for all those things. Get involved with those things, and glad to have you out on them. All right, bye-bye. We got to go.